What happens when a billionaire who trusts no one leaves his safe wide open and an 8-year-old maid's daughter walks in? Victor Hale sat alone in his study, the late afternoon sun bleeding through the towering windows, painting the Persian rug in fractured beams of gold and shadow. 52 years had made him a man of iron habits, routines carved into him like scars. But what truly defined him were the betrayals that had come before. His father's partner siphoning millions while smiling across the dinner table. His brother forging signatures to seize control of the family estate. The college love who sold company secrets for a rival's stock options. Each deception had reinforced the same lesson. Trust was a currency more dangerous than cash, and every time he'd spent it, he'd been left poorer. That was why his house, 27 rooms, walls hung with canvases worth more than some small towns, was strung with cameras like a spider's web. Nothing escaped his eye, nothing ever slipped through. From his high-backed leather chair, Victor studied the monitors on his desk. The newest maid had arrived, Angela Washington, 34, a woman with a posture that spoke of exhaustion and pride in equal measure. She moved with quiet precision through his marble halls, as if she carried her dignity like an invisible shield. Victor had combed through her background, 3 jobs, spotless references, a trail of debts she carried alone without complaint. Too spotless, perhaps. People always had cracks, it was just a matter of pressure. Yet what caught Victor's attention was not the mother, but the child that trailed behind her. Naomi Washington, 8 years old, eyes too wide, too knowing. She wore sneakers so worn the soles peeled at the edges and a backpack that sagged with loose papers. When Angela reminded her to stay out of the way, the girl obeyed without fuss, pulling out a unicorn-stickered notebook and a dull pencil. She sat cross-legged in the hallway, scratching out multiplication tables, her lips moving silently as she worked. She seemed small against the immensity of the mansion, yet Victor found his gaze lingering. The oversized yellow cleaning gloves she wore, borrowed from her mother, made her hands look like paws. It was both absurd and somehow disarming. It was Marcus, his driver and security chief, who broke the silence over the intercom. "Boss, maid's in position. Girl too." Victor didn't respond. His mind was already whirring with something darker, sharper. He had tested CEOs, CFOs, senators, and lawyers. Each crumbled when tempted. Greed was universal. Integrity was myth. But what about a child? Children hadn't yet learned the mask of self-restraint. They acted from instinct. An instinct, Victor believed, was selfishness in its purest form. That thought struck him with the weight of inevitability. He rose from his desk and moved to the safe embedded in the wall. A 12-digit code, biometric scanner, reinforced steel. Normally it was sealed tighter than a vault, but today he left it slightly ajar. Stacks of crisp bills, rubber-banded and immaculate, gleamed from inside. He tugged a few notes free and let them fall deliberately onto the rug. The sight of money against the deep threads of Persian weave looked like bait scattered in a trap. He adjusted the angle of his cameras, making certain they captured every corner of the room, then returned to his chair. Loosening his tie, he let his eyelids droop, his breath even out. To anyone else, he'd look like a man stealing a mid-afternoon nap. In truth, his eyes slitted just enough to watch. From the hall came the soft cadence of a child's voice. "Mom, his door is open." Angela's answer was weary, firm. "Don't go in there, Naomi, that's his private space." But curiosity is a force older than rules, stronger than fear. Victor's ears caught the delicate shift of footsteps, light as a cat's, crossing the threshold. A shadow flickered against the carpet, small, fragile, approaching. And then she was there. Naomi, framed by the oak door, yellow gloves glowing in the slanting light. Her gaze swept the room, lingering on the vast desk, then fixing on the safe. The bills scattered across the rug. She froze. Her chest rose and fell once, sharply, as if she understood at once the enormity of what she'd found. Victor's pulse quickened, though his body remained still, his breathing steady, every muscle trained to patience. This was the moment. This was when human nature revealed itself, raw, undeniable. Would she pocket a single bill, stuff them in her worn sneakers, slip one into the unicorn notebook no one would suspect? From beneath lowered lashes, Victor watched the child step closer, her eyes wide, her gloved hands hovering in the air. She was inches away now, the scattered cash almost glowing at her feet. Victor braced for confirmation of everything he believed. Naomi bent down, and for a heartbeat the room held its breath. Victor had never been a man to trust in first impressions. One honest act could just as easily be the result of coaching, or dumb luck, or the fear of being caught. He told himself this as he poured another glass of Macallan late one evening, the glow of the security monitors flickering across his face. On 3 separate recordings, the little girl had done what no adult in his life had ever done. She had seen temptation laid out before her and chosen to turn away. She had returned what wasn't hers, organized his jewelry with a reverence that puzzled him, and even straightened his tie as he pretended to sleep. And yet, Victor's paranoia was relentless. If she had been taught to act this way, if her mother had instructed her to play the role of innocence, then it was nothing more than another con. He needed more. The next test would be bolder, riskier. He knew it had to feel like more than an accident, more than carelessness. He wanted to see what the child would do when the evidence of greed was undeniable, when anyone with the faintest selfish thought could seize the opportunity. So he prepared carefully, like a chess master laying his pieces before the final trap. The following afternoon, Victor left his office door deliberately wide open. Sunlight spilled across his mahogany desk where a Rolex, diamond cufflinks, and a platinum tie clip gleamed like small lures against the dark wood. Each item had been chosen for its value, but more than that, for its portability. They were objects that could vanish in a child's pocket, objects that could be pawned or sold without a trace. To Victor's mind, this was the true test. He withdrew to the adjoining conference room, a crack in the door giving him a clear view. His body was a coil of restrained energy, his heart ticking like the grandfather clock in the hall. Marcus's voice came faintly over the intercom, confirming that Angela and Naomi had arrived on time. The ritual began, the shuffling of cleaning supplies, Angela's calm instructions, Naomi's smaller footsteps. Then came the pause, the unmistakable hush of a child noticing what should not be. Naomi's voice soft but clear. "Oh no, Mr. Hale left his things out again." Victor held his breath. Angela appeared a moment later, wiping her hands on her apron, her brows knitting when she saw her daughter standing in the doorway of the billionaire's office. "Naomi, I told you not to, but Mom," the girl interrupted, her gloved hands clenching around her notebook. "What if someone else sees? What if someone takes them and says it was us?" Her words struck Victor like a dart. That was his exact thought process, the reflex of a man who lived in suspicion. Not whether something could be stolen, but who would be blamed. The irony was bitter. Angela hesitated, torn between obeying the unspoken rules of her employer's fortress and protecting herself from inevitable suspicion. Finally, she sighed. "We'll tell Mr. Thompson. He can secure them." But Naomi had already slipped into the office, her sneakers silent on the Persian rug. She pulled a tissue from her pocket and with solemn care began polishing the Rolex as if it were some fragile relic. One by one, she cleaned each piece, lining them neatly in size order along the edge of the desk. She hummed quietly, a soft, tuneless melody, her oversized gloves making every motion clumsy but deliberate. Victor, hidden in the conference room, felt his chest tighten. He had seen CEOs sweat over contracts worth billions with less focus than this child gave to arranging his cufflinks. There was no calculation in her eyes, no furtive glance toward her mother to seek approval. She simply wanted to leave things better than she found them. Angela stood frozen in the doorway, exasperated but also strangely moved. "Baby, you can't just—" "It's okay, Mom," Naomi said, her voice firm for once. "I'm helping. Mr. Hale works so hard, he probably just forgot, like when you forget your keys because you're thinking about bills." The innocence of the comparison hit Victor like a slap. His careless scatter of wealth equated to Angela's frantic search for rent money and overdue utilities. He'd meant the test to expose weakness. Instead, it illuminated a mirror he didn't want to see. Angela finally crossed the room, pulling her daughter into a hug so tight it blurred the surveillance feed. "You have a good heart, baby," she whispered. "But not everyone deserves your trust, especially men like him." Victor's stomach twisted. Men like him. For decades, he had been right to assume betrayal, to anticipate greed. But now, seeing Angela's fear that one slip, one misunderstanding, could destroy everything she worked for, it stirred something far older than his paranoia. It stirred shame. And then the real crack appeared in his fortress of certainty. As Naomi turned to leave, she caught sight of the security camera tucked into the corner. She tilted her head, studying it for a long moment. Then she leaned close to her mother and whispered, loud enough for Victor's hidden microphone to catch, "Do you think he watches us all the time, even when we don't know it?" Angela stiffened, glancing at the lens. "Don't worry about that, baby. Just be careful." But Victor's blood ran cold. The child had seen the eyes in the walls. She had noticed what dozens of seasoned executives never had. She had sensed him watching. For the first time in years, Victor wasn't sure if he was the hunter or the one being studied. And that night, as the monitors replayed Naomi's small hands polishing his cufflinks, her innocent humming echoing through his speakers, Victor realized the test was no longer about her. It was about him. Would his walls hold against a child who saw through them without even trying? Gregory Hartman had always been the perfect servant. Silver hair combed like polished steel, posture straight as a soldier's, words measured to just the right degree of formality. For 7 years, Victor had relied on him to maintain the mansion's order. The schedules, the staff, the rituals of quiet efficiency that kept everything seamless. But perfection has a way of concealing rot. And lately, Victor's cameras had been showing him something he had ignored for too long. Gregory was watching, not him. Victor could have lived with that. But Angela. The butler's eyes lingered too long as she moved through the rooms, his gaze narrowing whenever Naomi laughed at something her mother said. It was a look Victor recognized. Possessive, territorial, dangerous. Marcus, his driver and head of security, had noticed too. "Something off about him, boss," he said one evening while checking the perimeter. "He's too careful, the type that hides his claws until you turn your back." Marcus's instincts had saved Victor's life before, in boardrooms and back alleys alike. Victor trusted those instincts. Still, trust needed proof, and proof wasn't long in coming. It began with small murmurs, overheard in the staff wing. Mrs. Patterson, the cook, mentioned hearing Gregory whispering late at night on the phone. The gardener reported Gregory had been in rooms he wasn't assigned to clean. None of it was incriminating on its own. But when Victor began cross-checking the household accounts, discrepancies appeared. Small amounts siphoned away under miscellaneous expenses, always signed by Gregory. Hundreds here, thousands there, clever thefts that could easily slip beneath a billionaire's radar. But Victor was paying attention now, and so was Naomi. One afternoon, she appeared on his security monitor standing outside his upstairs office, her unicorn notebook clutched to her chest. She frowned at something inside the room. Then her voice carried faintly. "Mr. Gregory, why are you in here?" Victor's pulse spiked. Gregory stood frozen in the corner of the feed, his hand on the handle of a drawer he had no business touching. "I'm checking that everything is in order, child. Run along now. But Mom says we're not supposed to go in Mr. Hale's private rooms." "I have standing permission," Gregory said sharply, his eyes narrowing. "Now go." Naomi lingered a second longer, suspicion plain on her face before her footsteps faded down the hall. Gregory waited until she was gone, then resumed rifling through the drawers. Victor's hand hovered over the intercom. Every instinct screamed to confront him, to drag him out by the collar. But decades of betrayal had taught him something important. Predators reveal themselves most fully when they think they're safe. And so Victor stayed silent, every nerve burning as he watched the butler move like a thief in the night. That evening, Gregory's mask of loyalty was back in place. He poured Victor's coffee himself, not his job, but done with an air of humble service. "Sir," he said, his cultured voice calm, "I feel it's my duty to raise concerns about Mrs. Washington." Victor set his cup down carefully. "Concerns? I wouldn't want to accuse anyone unjustly, but certain items have gone missing. Small things, a letter opener, some petty cash." Gregory's eyes dropped in a pantomime of sorrow. "I hesitate to say it, but these disappearances began after she was hired." Victor's face was unreadable. Inside, fury boiled. He had seen Gregory plant that very letter opener in Angela's cleaning cart on the monitors. But outwardly, he only asked, "Have you spoken to Marcus?" "No, sir. I wanted to bring it to you privately. After all, the woman has a child. I would hate to see them suffer if this is just a misunderstanding." The false concern dripped like poison. Victor knew the tactic well. Gregory wasn't just planting suspicion. He was playing the long game, setting Angela up to take the fall when his thefts escalated. That night, Victor lay awake in his massive bed, the mansion silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock. On his monitor replayed the moment Naomi had stood her ground against Gregory, her small voice defiant, "But Mom says we're not supposed to." That child had sharper instincts than most executives Victor had ever employed. She had seen through Gregory in seconds. And that was when Victor realized the true stakes. This wasn't just about theft anymore. Gregory wasn't simply stealing from him. He was building a trap, a frame so carefully constructed that when sprung, it would destroy Angela's livelihood and blacken Naomi's future. Victor's paranoia had been a weapon against the world, but for Angela and her daughter, it was a noose tightening around their necks. The next day, Gregory made his move. During Angela's shift, he discovered Victor's Patek Philippe watch in her supply cart. He performed the reveal like a magician, producing it with a sad shake of his head. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't imagine how it got here." Angela's face drained of color. "I didn't—" Victor cut her off with a glance, not at her, but at Naomi, who stood in the doorway clutching her notebook, eyes blazing. "He's lying," the girl said fiercely. "I saw him put things in the cart. I saw him." The room fell silent. Gregory's mask slipped for a fraction of a second, enough for Victor to see the venom underneath, a smile that was not a smile, a predator caught too early. For years, Victor had lived believing that no one could be trusted. But now, staring at Naomi's tear-bright eyes and Angela's trembling hands, he felt something new rising in his chest. Not suspicion, not fear. Resolve. Gregory thought he was the spider in the web, but he had forgotten one thing. This was Victor Hale's house, and no one framed his people. The test had changed. Naomi and Angela had already passed. Now it was Gregory who was on trial, and Victor was done pretending to sleep. The marble floors of the courthouse gleamed like they'd been polished for judgment itself. Reporters swarmed the steps outside, their voices clashing in a chaotic chorus of speculation. Gregory Hartman, once the polished butler who had moved through Victor Hale's mansion like a ghost of efficiency, now walked shackled between two deputies. He still held himself tall, chin lifted, silver hair immaculate, as if this were some misunderstanding he would smooth away with a few well-placed words. But his eyes, narrowed, calculating, betrayed the truth. He wasn't here to confess. He was here to fight. Naomi lifted her chin. "I didn't misinterpret anything. I wrote exactly what I saw when I saw it. That's called evidence, right?" The gallery chuckled again. Even Judge Thornton's stern mouth twitched before she rapped her gavel. "Proceed." Naomi closed her notebook softly. Her small voice carried in the hush. "He was lying. About my mom. About me. He smiled mean every time, like he was happy he was going to hurt us. That's what bad people do." She turned her gaze directly on Gregory. "And I know what a mean smile looks like." For the first time, Gregory's polished mask cracked. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering furiously, his face flushing red. The prosecutor asked one final question. "Naomi, were you afraid?" "Yes. But Mom says sometimes you have to do the right thing even when you're scared, especially then." The gallery erupted in quiet applause until the gavel slammed again. Victor felt something shift inside him. For decades he had believed greed ruled all, but here was an 8-year-old proving that integrity could roar louder than fear. But the most shocking moment hadn't come yet. When Gregory was called to testify, he tried to keep his mask, but Blackwood pressed him too far. "Isn't it true," the prosecutor asked, "that you weren't only stealing valuables but selling information?" Gregory sneered, the venom in him finally spilling. "Why not? Men like Victor Hale hoard wealth while people like me serve them for scraps. I took what I deserved. His secrets, his deals, his acquisitions. I sold them all. For years." Gasps filled the courtroom. Angela covered her mouth. Naomi clutched her notebook tighter. Victor sat straighter, the weight of betrayal heavier than even he had imagined. The judge's gavel slammed. "Order! Order in the court!" But the truth was out now, irretrievable. Gregory hadn't just stolen trinkets. He had sold the very heart of Victor's empire. And it was Naomi, the child with yellow gloves and a unicorn notebook, who had cracked open the lies that even Victor's paranoia had missed. The courtroom went silent, everyone staring at the billionaire who had once trusted no one. And Victor, with all eyes on him, felt the words rise unbidden. "I trusted the wrong man for 7 years, and I almost lost everything, but the one person I never thought to believe saved me." The gavel struck again, court adjourned, but the war was only beginning. The rain had washed the courthouse steps clean by the morning of Gregory Hartman's sentencing. For weeks, the trial had consumed the city, headlines screaming of betrayal, espionage, and the shocking testimony of a child who had brought down a man twice her size and 20 times her age. Inside, the gallery was packed with reporters, victims of Gregory's schemes, and strangers drawn to the drama of wealth and deceit. But for Victor Hale, seated rigidly in the front row, it wasn't spectacle, it was closure. Gregory shuffled in, wrists shackled, orange jumpsuit a far cry from the tailored suits he once wore like armor. Yet even stripped of finery, he carried himself with the same arrogance, chin high, gaze sharp. He didn't look at Victor, he didn't look at Angela, but his eyes lingered, just for a fraction, on Naomi. And in that look was all the venom of a predator who hated being beaten by a child. Judge Patricia Thornton's voice cut through the tension. Gregory Hartman, you stand convicted of multiple counts of grand larceny, fraud, conspiracy, and corporate espionage. You have left in your wake ruined reputations, broken families, and decades of deception. This court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 15. The gavel fell like thunder. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Gregory's mask cracked, fury seething across his features. He turned suddenly, shouting over the deputies dragging him away. You'll regret trusting them, Victor. That maid, that brat, they'll bleed you dry. They're no different than me. For the first time in public memory, Victor Hale stood. His voice, calm and resonant, carried across the courtroom. The difference, Gregory, is that you never understood what they already know. Trust isn't weakness. It's the only wealth worth having, and it's something you'll never touch again. The deputies pulled Gregory through the side door. The clang of it shutting echoed like a final curtain. Angela's hands trembled in her lap. For weeks, she had carried the weight of suspicion, of being accused, of nearly losing everything she had fought for. Now, tears welled in her eyes, not of fear, but of release. Beside her, Naomi sat upright, unicorn notebook balanced on her knees, scribbling quickly. Victor leaned down, curious. What are you writing? She held up the page. In messy letters it read, bad people lost, good people stayed. Victor felt something stir in his chest, something he had buried for so long he almost didn't recognize it. Hope. Life after the trial didn't return to normal. It became something entirely new. For Angela, the mansion no longer felt like hostile territory, but a place she managed with quiet authority. Victor had promoted her to household manager, her salary tripled, her R's stabilized. For the first time, she could tuck Naomi into bed at night instead of rushing between jobs. The weight of exhaustion that had lived permanently in her eyes began to fade. For Naomi, the world blossomed. Preston Academy, the prestigious private school Victor had introduced her to, accepted her with a scholarship after she scored in the highest percentile they'd seen in years. Her unicorn notebook, once filled with multiplication tables and scribbled observations, now brimmed with essays about integrity, sketches of her grandmother Rose, and even an entry titled, "The Day Mr. Hale Smiled for Real." And for Victor? His mansion of 27 rooms, once silent as a mausoleum, now thrummed with life. He found himself wandering into the kitchen, drawn by the smell of Mrs. Patterson's Sunday roast, sitting quietly at the long table as staff laughed and shared stories. At first he sat stiffly, apart, but slowly, week by week, the stiffness eased. Naomi would chatter at his side, Angela would pass him a plate, Marcus would nudge him with a joke, and one Sunday, without planning to, Victor laughed. The sound startled him, raw and unpracticed, but it was real. Still, the old instincts whispered at him in the dark hours. Was this another trap? Would trust betray him again? Then he'd remember Naomi standing in that courtroom, voice steady as steel, notebook in hand, unshaken even under Gregory's glare. He'd remember Angela refusing the envelope of money, even when desperation bled from her bones. He'd remember Rose, frail but smiling, telling him, "Family doesn't vote you in, they just are." For a man who once trusted no one, those memories became his anchor. The most powerful moment came one evening, months after Gregory's sentencing. Victor had just returned from a board meeting, his mind buzzing with negotiations and numbers when he found Naomi waiting in his office. She wore her Preston uniform, ribbons neat in her braids, notebook open on her lap. "Mr. Hale," she said seriously, "I wrote something for school. The teacher said it was good, but I wanted you to hear it." She cleared her throat, then read aloud. "The richest man I know isn't the one with the most money. It's the one who learns how to believe again. Because money can buy big houses and shiny things, but it can't buy trust. Trust is given. And sometimes the poorest people are the ones rich enough to give it freely. My mom says that's what makes us human. I think it's what makes us family." Her small voice filled the vast room like a hymn. Victor couldn't speak. His throat tightened, his eyes stung. For decades he had measured wealth in numbers, in accounts, in safes sealed behind steel. Now, for the first time, he saw it clearly. Wealth was in this child's courage, in her mother's pride, in the laughter echoing through halls that had once been hollow. Naomi closed her notebook, stood, and without hesitation wrapped her arms around him. Victor froze, then slowly, awkwardly, returned the hug. It was the first embrace he'd given in 15 years. "You don't look lonely anymore," Naomi whispered, and for once, Victor didn't feel the need to argue. That night, as the mansion glowed warm against the darkness, Victor poured himself a glass of scotch, not out of habit, but in quiet celebration. He walked through rooms that no longer felt like a fortress, but a home. At his desk sat a new addition. A framed drawing Naomi had given him. 4 figures stood together beneath a crooked rainbow: Angela, Naomi, Rose, and himself. Beneath it, in her uneven handwriting, were 3 words: family is trust. Victor smiled, setting the glass down untouched. The safe behind the bookshelf stood empty now, long since moved to a bank. But he no longer needed it as proof of security. His real fortune sat framed on the desk. And for the man who once trusted no one, that was wealth beyond measure.